Money FM 89.3, the best of Saturday mornings. Saturday morning sit down.
Our Saturday morning sit-down conversation. We have Mark Greaves in the studio. He is the chairman of ComfortDelGro. And some of you may not have realized, but if you've traveled to London lately, nearly 20% of the double-decker buses that you see there are ComfortDelGro buses. The company is rapidly expanding and has been expanding overseas. And their overseas revenue now accounts for some 50% of total revenue. According to the company, that's just the beginning. Mark, great to have you in the studio today. What a story you have to tell about ComfortDelGro these days.
Thank you very much, Glenn. It's great to be here with you and Neil, and it's an honor to be able to tell some of our story to your listeners and to run through what we've been doing and what we hope to do in the future. So
it's not
looking forward to it.
It's not just taxis anymore, is it?
It certainly isn't just taxis, although you put your sort of finger on the opening button, as it were, because we are ComfortDelGro, and Comfort itself was a company which was formed by bringing together all of the taxi drivers in Singapore in the National Trade Union Congress Cooperative Movement for Transport, which is what Comfort stands for. Now, NTUC Comfort, as a cooperative, had an ethos of really looking after all of its stakeholders, and that meant its drivers, it meant its mechanics, it meant the engineers, it meant, of course, the passenger, and that ethos has stayed with us to this day. The history of Comfort is fascinating. It started, as I say, as just an agglomeration of taxi drivers brought together by common interest, but then it corporatized, it merged with Delgro, it became ComfortDelGro. Competition was introduced, other taxi operators came in, so ComfortDelGro then got itself into the bus industry way back before my time, and acquired in London a company called Metroline that you've already alluded to is a major operator of London buses. And that was way back in the year 2000, that acquisition. So 25 years, ComfortDelGro as a group has been operating a significant portion of London's iconic double-decker red buses. And that's very exciting. They don't have ComfortDelGro written all over them, but we're slowly introducing that concept. They are identified as Metroline buses.
More branding coming.
There is more branding coming, and we're trying to make sure that the branding is more coherent and more cohesive. We're trying to get the story across to all of our stakeholders, but also people who aren't yet our stakeholders, whom we'd like to become passengers, or drivers, or employees, or just indeed shareholders even. Let's not forget them, because from a cooperative, we've in fact become a public listed corporation with a market capitalization now approaching 4 billion Singapore dollars. And we're a major component of the daily SGX trades. And it's something that we're very proud of.
That's the key, isn't it, Mark? Getting the story out there. I followed ComfortDelGro's progress over the years as a casual observer, but it was only when I was at a recent event with the British High Commissioner celebrating SG UK business partnerships that they mentioned two things. One, that the 20% of the London bus fleet, as you mentioned, is now ComfortDelGro. That I had a sentimental reason for liking that. My late father-in-law was a London bus driver. And number two, Manchester as well. I met the mayor of Manchester, a very well-known guy called Andy Burnham, and he was telling me about ComfortDelGro in Manchester, which is where I studied. So you have an imprint in London and Manchester, I believe. So maybe start there, what you're doing there, and why. Why this overseas expansion into transport?
Okay, both two good questions. The why to begin with, I think, is that, we are very much focused now on being a multimodal mobility company and taking the skills that we've developed here and the experience that we have to overseas markets in an even bigger way than we've done in the past. And the reason for that primarily is that Singapore is kind of a small place. There are many things that we can do here, but we already have roughly 2/3 of the bus market here. We are beginning to become a more significant player in rail. Globally in rail, we've now increased our rail footprint and our kilometrage, if I can put it that way, from about 80 kilometers to 350, 360 kilometers, either currently operating or under mobilization. And what we're doing is taking what we've learned in Singapore to overseas markets and helping to modernize, to electrify, to make sustainable the networks that other transport operators have. So we've done a substantial amount of that in London, and we have a very good relationship with both the Mayor and with Transport for London. I know Mayor Andy Burnham myself I wouldn't say quite well, but I know Mayor Andy Burnham.
The Mayor of Manchester.
The Mayor of Manchester. And he was quite effusive in what we've helped them already to achieve after having been operating only since January this year. So it's about electrification, it's about sustainability, it's about taking ComfortDelGro's relationship with its stakeholders into other markets. And indeed, the Mayor, Andy Burnham in Manchester, was particularly struck with our history as a cooperative initially.
Can I just add, is this buses or trams?
In Manchester, at the moment, it's buses.
Okay.
But we don't currently run any trams worldwide, but never say never, because there's always scope to have a look at these things. So we now do rail, as you know, in places like Auckland. Maybe you didn't know, but we do rail in Auckland. We're bidding for some rail operations also in Australia, where we have significant number of buses. Now, what we do is not only do we just go and do these things in these other markets that we feel comfortable with, but we also learn from them. And we bring best practice that they've developed that we may not have known about back into Singapore. So we have a very good sort of two-way traffic in the best way of doing things.
Any examples of that?
In a particular market. Well, particularly in areas such as passenger safety. One thing we've learned a lot about in Australia, for example, is antisocial behavior, where there is, for some odd reason, particularly since the pandemic, and this may be something to do with social media, but there is a tendency on the part of young people to, frankly, not treat bus drivers or the vehicles with particular respect.
We've seen cases of that here, for sure.
Indeed, right? We have. So we are putting in place certain measures. In some particular markets, it goes to the extent of having almost cages around drivers, which doesn't sound very user-friendly, but we have to make sure we look after our drivers, who are, of course, important stakeholders themselves. But we are learning also to use predictive AI, to use more AI in what we do to look after our vehicles, to look after our passengers, such as in maintenance. We can tell when something's going to go wrong before it does. And that we're trialing in, actually Metroline in London, we are trialing some AI dispatch systems whereby we can minimize the amount of time overall which passengers have to wait. We've reduced passenger waiting time in London by about 2,000 hours per year by introducing AI-enabled dispatch systems. So the bus doesn't necessarily go out at 6:37 because something is backed up or because there are roadworks or some issues. It may go out at 6:39. But through the apps and through the real-time data that we can convey to passengers, they know that and they don't have to go wait. It's something that we do in Singapore as well.
Yeah, we're in conversation with Mark Greaves, the chairman of ComfortDelGro, talking about the organization's expansion overseas. And Mark, I know that your company doesn't have anything to do with this, but let me just ask you a broad question about maintenance. We've seen so many train faults in Singapore over the last 6 months, many more than we're used to. And we're seeing, this idea of maintenance on these big systems over time is such a very important thing. How does ComfortDelGro approach that for your buses overseas and in Singapore to make sure that we have as few breakdowns as possible? Of course, you talked about passenger safety and driver safety, rightly so. How do we help to get more of a handle on these complex moving systems to make sure that they do operate the way they should?
You're absolutely right. We've seen the recent report that came out, I think only yesterday. The final report came out from LTA about the state of MRT performance and light rail performance in the past, in the recent year. Maintenance is an issue. Investment is an issue. Now, what we try to do is to stay ahead of the game, partly by what I was talking about in relation to AI-enabled predictive maintenance. For example, we can roll across a track and we can find out when there is an issue with the rail before that becomes an issue. We can tell that something is going to fail within the next X thousand kilometers, and therefore we can actually deal with it ahead of the game. And that means dealing with it in the middle of the night when there's nobody traveling on it, so that we can make sure that it works during the day.
Just good maintenance, right?
Yeah, just good maintenance, but maintenance is kind of ahead of the game.
Yeah.
And we're introducing more and more of that, and we will see that getting better. It also, of course, requires money. Because investment requires money. Now,
the
some
CapEx
of the markets
must be huge in your industry.
CapEx is pretty significant, but a lot of the maintenance CapEx, of course, is also required from operators who are sometimes more responsible for the track than we are from the authority, from the agency. So in some markets they have more money than in other markets, and they're reluctant sometimes to do maintenance they don't see as being essential. I mean, I think that's the important thing about ComfortDelGro, which is not hugely widely known, but we're now operating in 13 countries with 22,500 employees. We've got 1.2 billion invested in the UK. That's in Singapore dollars. 1.2 billion Singapore dollars in the UK. Close to $1 billion Singapore dollars in Australia. We're in New Zealand. We're in China. We are across Europe now and growing more across Europe as we are about to start operations in a Paris Metroline with our joint venture partner, and we've been awarded the Stockholm Metro. So, we are, as I said, not just sort of taking our skills to them. Every market we go to, we learn from. And I'm always saying to my fellow directors, but I also say to all the management team, it's all about constant learning. Lifelong learning and staying ahead of the game. And you may think that you've got something beautifully bedded down and it's going to run forever. But believe me, it isn't going to run forever. Something sooner or later is going to come along to give it a shot. It may be something internal, it may be some external factor, but something is going to rock the boat. So you've got to be ready.
Mark, this is what I truly love about Singapore. This is a great example of Singapore, if I can be blunt, selling snow to the Scandinavians, because the London public transport system has been around for the best part of 200 years. The Australian one has been around for almost 100 years. Singapore is a relatively new country, and yet we are selling buses to London.
And technology and know-how.
If you say it out loud, it almost sounds absurd that a tiny country like Singapore is selling 20% of the flagship Red London buses to London. And I was very intrigued by a point you made earlier. You said we are selling what we have learned in Singapore to other countries. What is it? What have we learned about our public transport system that makes it so much in demand, that knowledge, that know-how, that makes it so much in demand all around the world?
Fantastic question. It's a combination of factors. It's not just one thing. It's a combination of reliability. It doesn't always work, as we've just discussed. There are issues from time to time. But in terms of global league tables, reliability in Singapore is high, and reliability at ComfortDelGro and in our operations through SPS Transit and in rail in particular is off the scale. I mean, it's amongst the world's highest, and we can actually take that narrative to operators around the world, and they will listen because they can tell there's something to listen to. It's making travel a pleasant experience. What was once a chore, commuter travel, it's becoming kind of a pleasure, and it's almost, more important than the destination itself, what you can do on board, how you feel on board, the experience you have on board. And this is what we transmit to people who come and visit us here and come and look at our bus operations, look at our rail operations, look at our stations. I mean, our stations are absolutely astonishing. They're not necessarily down to us as ComfortDelGro, but we do have some input into them. And you walk into many of the new stations on Thomson East Coast Line and so on, and frankly, it's like walking to the Grand Hyatt Hotel. And that's the way it feels. Whereas, clearly in some of the legacy systems that exist around the world, world, that is very much not the case. So there is kind of an inbuilt advantage there, but we make the most of it that we can with our global operations. We have a hell of a story to tell. So I'm very passionate about this. I actually want to see everything that ComfortDelGro does effectively replicating, let's say, Singapore Airlines. I want ComfortDelGro to bring Singapore's land transport expertise and public transport expertise out there to the world as the Singapore Airlines of urban mobility. And we're very, very experienced in urban mobility in particular. That's what we do, and we can bring it to anybody who'll listen.
We're talking to Mark Greaves, the chairman of ComfortDelGro. And Mark, as you mentioned earlier, operations now for ComfortDelGro, 13 countries, over 54,000 vehicles, hundreds of kilometers of rail, tens of thousands of employees. The largest land transport company in the world. Is there a challenge? Is there a possibility of being stretched too thin of at some point that system, because you've got so much going on around the world, that there could be things that happen that disappoint the customers or the regulators or whomever? Or is it just a nature of how you've structured your business to make sure that you've thought about that in advance?
I mean,
you're a long way from home in a lot of these jurisdictions, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. One of the important things to remember, though, is that Singapore is always our core operation. It is it's our heart, it's our DNA, it's our embedded home. So whatever it is that we're doing outside of Singapore, we're totally committed to maintaining the quality, reliability, sustainability of our services here. And we have a really close and good working relationship, not only with the Ministry of Transport, but also with the Land Transport Authority, the LTA. And our modus operandi is to operate collaboratively. What we've seen is that in many markets, the operator, the people who are running the buses for the government, in fact, has a sort of customer relationship. It's transactional. We'll come and run your buses for 5 years. We'll do it this way. We'll do it. And that doesn't really build a sustainable ecosystem in which everybody feels involved. Now, we want to work with all our stakeholders, and that includes partners and collaborators who you might not immediately think we'd be actually effectively getting resource from, to answer your question. So whilst I mentioned that we're doing things in Paris, it's worth noting that we have a 25% interest there in a joint venture with a partner called RATP, and we are developing and will be operating Paris Metroline 15. And that should go live by the end of next year. It might be the beginning of the year after. So, much of the heavy lifting is being done by the partner. We don't pretend to be, all of us, French speakers, and it's a difficult country to navigate. So we're a little bit more cautious there than we might be in a place like Manchester or Liverpool or whatever, where we feel that we can do things pretty much by ourselves because of the extensive experience we have and existing infrastructure we've got in the UK in terms of people and management and resources. So that's pretty good. But likewise, rather similar to Paris, when we go to Stockholm, actually we're operating with a partner there too. We are just 45%, our partner's 55%, but it means we're working with somebody who knows the field well, who understands it, and who will bring resources to bear. Auckland, I mentioned previously, we run the Auckland Metropolitan Rail System, which is, a fantastic system. It's called Auckland One Rail, but it's a joint venture partner with an Australian entity. And so we don't necessarily have to put all that much in terms of resources into it, but where we feel comfortable, where we feel that we're qualified, we do. Where we think we need help, we go get help. Yeah. So we're very driven by this concept of collaboration with the regulator, with our joint venture partners, with all our other stakeholders. And from what happens at the AGM, from the questions we get, we can tell that this is actually what our shareholders want to see. They want to see us growing. They know that there's a limit to what we can do in Singapore because of its sheer geography. But they're always asking the question, what are you doing next? And we have people suggesting that we should go and build hotels or that we should, But we will stay with our core business.
Stick to what you know.
Yep, it's what we know. So we'll stick with public transport, but we'll take it to rail. We'll take it maybe to, you mentioned tram, who knows? Anything might happen. We'll do point-to-point, i.e. the taxi business and the private hire business. We've embraced private hire essentially onto our Taxi Zig platform here, but we've also gone further. We've acquired in the UK Addison Lee, which was a £300 million investment, significant investment. And we've acquired, in Australia, we've acquired the whole of A to B, which owns the 1-3 cabs franchise throughout the entire country. So we're the largest taxi operator in Australia. We are the single biggest premium operator in London, and we can bring these things together and get them working together. And another thing I'd like to mention that we do really well is non-emergency patient transport. We've got a little business here called Medcare, but we've got a fabulous business in Australia called National Patient Transport. It's in Victoria, it's in New South Wales. And what it does is it takes non-emergency patients to hospital appointments, to medical appointments. For example, if you're going for chemo, if you're going for some kind of therapy, if you're going for dialysis, you need a fairly specialized transport that has some degree of medical facilities on board, but it doesn't need to be an emergency ambulance. And what this does is this takes the strain off the ambulance system. So the hospitals and the health authorities love it because it means the ambulance system as such is able to do much more for people who really need emergency ambulance services.
How many of those vehicles are in Singapore currently, or how many will there be?
In Singapore, it's not large, but I think we're close to being the largest single operator. It's very big in Australia. We're looking at it in other jurisdictions, and it will get bigger because it really fits in with what we're trying to do with our point-to-point business, which is to focus, and by point-to-point, I mean the taxi, private hire, and so on. So it's a bit of a jargon, but I think most of your listeners will understand it. So it fits in with our drive to focus on the premium sector, the premium segment, which is not really able to be commoditized in quite the same way. So we're not sort of doubling down to the lowest price level. We wouldn't pretend that for a moment. But although I would say our taxis are highly competitive, particularly when surge pricing kicks in, and ours are the best. Yep. But in other areas, we will provide sort of more personalized service to people who require something different.
Yes, I'm using the Comfort app right now. It's on my phone, as you can see there, the Zig app.
Is it time for me to go, Neil?
Almost. When I recently saw the Mayor of Manchester speak, Andy Burnham, he did praise the electrification of the ComfortDelGro vehicles. Bringing it back to Singapore, we've got some lofty green goals here. The 30 by 30 for food production is just one example. Moving ahead, what are ComfortDelGro's green goals? I know electrification is part of that.
Yeah, we've been on a sustainability journey for quite a long time now, and that's included not only reducing our own emissions, but also making sure that all of our practices, including maintenance and what we do in engineering and so on, are also made as green as we can make them in all respects. So we've got a very effective sustainability division, if you like, and it's something that we take extremely seriously. And many of our shareholders are very interested in that and want to see us doing more. Electrification is a key part of that, and we've done a lot of it already across China. For example, our taxi fleet in China, we are approximately 80% electrified across the whole of our China fleet, and we're 100% electric in Beijing, Nanjing, and Chengdu. It's one of those things, sustainability, particularly in terms of emissions. You can get to a certain point, but then it becomes harder and harder and harder to get 1 point better because you've taken all the low-hanging fruit. In Singapore, we are already very focused on electrifying. As you know, we've built our new multi-story bus depot in Sengkang, and that's a first too, to have for a double-decker bus to enter a multi-story
it's near where
facility
I live.
It's pretty impressive. And that's the kind of technology that we'd like to bring to other markets. Generally, the challenge is power supply, and this is what we've found more often than not, both in the UK but also in Australia. The grids are just not ready. But we've been working on hydrogen supply. We have a number of hydrogen buses currently already running in London and in Australia. But there's still some way to go. But we are very, very focused on it. We've invested a large amount in electrification, and we're very pleased to work with Mayor Andy Burnham on this because he has the same objective. And that's what I meant about collaboration. And the way we at ComfortDelGro do things is that we will sit down with the regulator, with the relevant ministry. We'll say, well, what are you trying to achieve? And how can we help you to achieve that? By bringing some of our practices, what we've learned, and by perhaps learning from how you're going to do things yourselves, and maybe we'll end up doing something differently back home. So it's a very collaborative process. It's something that will continue. We are not abandoning either our sustainability objectives nor indeed our diversity, equity and inclusion objectives, because we know that these objectives and the planet all need looking after and nurturing, and we're staying the distance.
Talking with Mark Greaves, the chairman of ComfortDelGro. Mark, last question for me is one that hits close to home, which is the status of taxis in Singapore. Pre-COVID, you could hail a taxi on the street anytime. We know we've lost thousands of drivers, not with ComfortDelGro alone, but across the taxi spectrum here for a variety of reasons during COVID. Is that a challenge for you now? I hear you're getting into the ride-hailing service more, but obviously the competition with Grab and others in the ride-hailing. Are you interested in getting more flag-down taxis back on the road in Singapore? Or is that even a possibility in the world in which we live today?
This is something that we debate regularly with LTA and with the ministry, and indeed with the minister himself. We certainly feel that there is a continuing requirement for regular taxis, for licensed taxis, not only for unsocial hours. A lot of drivers in private hire vehicles they feel that they've done their driving for the day and that they can pack up. And it may be more difficult, therefore, to get them to go to slightly more remote areas.
And more expensive.
And more expensive. So that's one area. But the other also is for people who simply can't deal with an app and can't deal with that kind of thing. And we do everything that we can to make that simple for them with QR codes and so on. But even a QR code means you've got to have a smartphone, and maybe they're just not happy with a smartphone. So we think taxi has a role for final mile. We think this is very important. In Singapore, final mile is sometimes not very long, but we think that's a key consideration. Fundamentally, the industry is transforming. At the end of this transformation, but I think there probably is no end to this transformation. It will continue, as I was saying. You've always got to be ready for the next thing. But this transformation is going to it's going to be a transition ultimately to a much greater deployment of autonomous vehicles that we will see across markets generally, but in particular in Singapore, because as a geo-fenced area with a pretty unique road system where, for example, I tell you, it's quite remarkable that nearly all our roads are effectively one way. Almost every road is a dual carriageway system of one kind or another, so there's a minimal amount of oncoming traffic, which reduces one of the hazards. They're not all one way, and if you get yourself into the Ulu, of course, it's a little bit different. But I've ridden in autonomous vehicles both in Guangzhou, where we have a pilot scheme going with the AVs, in Pony AI. We're currently taking fare-paying passengers in our Guangzhou pilot scheme, and that's going extraordinarily well with Pony AI. I've also been in an autonomous taxi in Germany. These things drive themselves very intuitively.
Can you do a flag-down autonomous taxi? And is that what you're looking at doing in Singapore? A street job, as they call them?
That would be quite interesting. You might have to throw yourself in front of it. And I think
it would come. But I mean,
it'll stop.
Getting back to your point, not everybody wants to use an app or knows how or is comfortable. Right. And with this lack of regular taxis out there.
Look, I think our main challenge, is our main challenge actually is the drivers. The taxi driving community historically they're a very vocal community in Singapore. 40-something years ago, I actually attended the general meeting of taxi drivers of the Comfort Cooperative that voted to convert itself to a corporation. And there was a lot of vocal stuff going on in a number of dialects, which I'd never even heard of at that stage, let alone understood. And they continue to be a vocal community. But one thing about taxi driving community generally is that it is at the upper end of the demographic. And it's very difficult to draw young people into driving taxis. So we are doing what we can to try and
incentivize in some way, or
no, not really incentivize. What we're trying to do is to try to make it a more socially acceptable role to have, and try and not so much glamorize it. But if you think of our Addison Lee drivers, for example, are all immaculately turned out in suits and look snappy and so on. Have in mind, for example, taxi drivers in Japan who are all wearing white gloves and looking good. That sort of touch, it kind of raises the status a bit of a taxi driver. So what we want to do is to prepare our drivers, our existing stakeholder drivers, whom we regard as very much part of the family, and this is our cooperative ethos at work again. We want to make sure that they're ready, that they're prepared for transitioning either to other roles or to being operators of AVs, but to be involved in some way so that they can see a future beyond being a taxi driver. And that's a great challenge, and that's one where we work with Ministry of Manpower as well as Ministry of Transport, because we have at the moment significant driver shortages in areas like in buses and so on. We have to bring them in when we can from overseas. Autonomous vehicle technology will no doubt alleviate that shortage, but where we do have drivers, we want to make sure that they are looked after. And these drivers, many of them have been with us for decades. We're not going to let them down.
Last one from me. It's a public transport geek question, because I'm a public transport geek. 2 parts. Do you sometimes feel frustrated, may not be the right word, that we're a victim of our own success in Singapore? We are very efficient. Our public transport, in my humble opinion, is the best in the world by far. So when occasionally it does go wrong, we tend to overreact with our complaints. And the second part is, I have a lot of sympathy for the legacy transport systems that you mentioned, London, New York, Paris, because they were pioneers. They were first. So I sometimes feel sorry for them, and I feel sorry for the public transport providers here, because there's often a lack of perspective. What's your take?
Oh, look, you're absolutely right. I mean, we can get very used to having a super efficient transport system, so used to it, in fact, that the slightest thing goes wrong, or, the train or the bus is 1 minute late, and there's a massive whinge on social media, or everybody gives somebody a hard time. And it is sometimes said that there are some people in this world who complain more than others. I don't want to point the finger at any particular demographic or this one, but when people get used to something, they complain if it doesn't turn up. So, yeah, there is some complaint that goes on. But, I mean, we put up with it. We do our best. We try and look after our passengers really as well as we can. And if anything is going wrong, we try to get out there and get them the message as soon as possible that this isn't going to happen, or that that's gone wrong. And, the replacement bus will be there in seconds. And we put people on the platforms. We put people at the bus stops. We shepherd them and herd them. And we throw everything we can at it. Fortunately, as you rightly pointed out, it doesn't happen too often. And then the legacy systems, that's why when we go overseas to talk to Manchester, or as we are now to Liverpool or to London and in Australia, we don't go in there with a, we do this better than you do type of attitude. We go in there with a, look, we're lucky. We didn't have your problems because we started much later.
We learned from them.
Yeah, you've taught us really where we are now, and now we can come and help you to get to nearer to where we are, and we'll learn from you further. So that's our approach. It's collaborative, it's stakeholder-led, and it's very inclusive.
Fabulous.
Mark, we're going to leave it there, but thank you so much for being with us today. Mark Greaves, the chairman of ComfortDelGro. Fascinating story, and one that is probably a surprise to many of our listeners today, but thanks for being with us to share it.
Thank you, Neil.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.